Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the Egyptian blogosphere takes a hit. A voice of dissent goes to jail. 24's Jack Bauer, action hero or propaganda tool? And if you can't hear this sound, you're getting old. Welcome back to The Listening Post. We start with a story we touched on last week, the jailing of the blogger who calls himself Kareem Amer. He is the first blogger to be convicted by an Egyptian court, which jailed him for 3 years for insulting Islam, plus 1 year for his comments on President Hosni Mubarak. There's a lot to this story. It's considered a warning sign by other bloggers, and not just those in Egypt. This is one of those legal cases that's now about much more than one person, Kareem Amer. He's just 22 years old, a former law student, not the first independent political voice to run afoul of the Mubarak government, and he won't be the last. But his case has touched a nerve on the internet. It's all over the web, attracting the support of human rights groups, triggering protests, small but numerous, Washington, London, Rome. Julien Pain works on the Internet Freedom Desk for Reporters Without Borders. We reached him via webcam in Paris.
The regime fears that if people like Kareem or other bloggers start speaking out on the internet, that could lead to real outbursts, and that could even lead to the collapse of the regime.
The Egyptian blogosphere has grown into a lively place, chock full of political opinion. Like many bloggers, Amer has criticized the Mubarak government's human rights record, but he was also critical of the way Islamic teachings have been interpreted by Muslims to justify violence, and he was tough on Al-Azhar, the Islamic university he attended. After he blogged about the university, he was called to a hearing. They told me that the article is considered slanderous and insulting, he said. I didn't write anything like that. All I tried to do was deliver my idea and criticize something that I saw. But the legal process was underway that would eventually land Amer in prison.
Bloggers, they have a lot of influence, and a lot of young people read them, and so they have serious political power in Egypt. During the elections, when the whole world spotlight, particularly the American spotlight, was on the Egyptian government, keen to show that the Egyptians were behaving themselves and that they were making these promised steps towards democratic reform, that the bloggers were basically tolerated. But since the elections, the international spotlight has moved away, and now the Egyptian government has taken this opportunity to settle scores with a lot of people it had problems with last year in the run-up to the elections, including other political parties, including the Islamists, and also including these bloggers. And finally now the Egyptian government is going around knocking on people's doors, dragging them off, locking them up, torturing them, and doing just what it used to do before the spotlight was on them in the first place.
Egyptian newspapers have some leeway to be critical of the government, but the state has always kept tight controls on TV and electronic media. The advent of the blogosphere and its unfettered opinions means that Egyptians are seeing the kind of political material they've never seen before. Bloggers have also used the net to expose scandals. Actual videos of Egyptian police torturing suspects have appeared on YouTube. By posting them, the bloggers have forced the government to confront some ugly truths about its own security services.
The bloggers are playing an interesting role in Egypt. There are many bloggers in Egypt, nobody knows quite how many. And one of the roles that they're playing is that they're creating safe space for the mainstream media to report stories. Stories that the mainstream media couldn't touch or won't touch will appear on a blog, and then they can touch it because they can report on it in the context of this blog is saying this. Second thing that's happening is bloggers will be tipped off to a story by a journalist so that that journalist can then report the story.
That's a tricky way of doing business.
It's tricky and dangerous. I mean, that's why bloggers end up in jail and journalists end up in jail.
Not all of the bloggers out there are supportive of Amer. Amira Al-Husseini blogs from Canada. She writes, many bloggers in the Middle East tried to distance themselves from the case because they did not want to be associated with blasphemy against Islam. Some believe the blogger got what he deserved for swimming against the tide. Yasmin Amin calls her Cairo-based blog Banos. Her take, Kareem only did what Allah has told every Muslim to do. Be maintainers of justice, bearers of witness of Allah's sake, though it may be against your own selves. The Egyptian blogger, Sharif. Let's not argue about whether we are supporting an atheist blogger. We are supporting an Egyptian who is being denied his rights. this could also be the beginning of imprisoning activists for insulting the president. Mahmoud Al-Yusuf, a blogger facing a defamation case of his own in a Bahraini court. If Egypt leads, the Arab world are supposed to follow. So the jailing of people for simply writing their thoughts is forging ahead unchecked in the Middle East, and there doesn't seem to be any will whatsoever to stop it. The Egyptian authorities are very sensitive on this story. The same government that campaigned in 2005 on democratic reforms and a new openness now says it rejects criticism by what it calls certain foreign media and non-governmental organizations. The Mubarak government also has a tricky balancing act on its hands. It's under attack by democratic reformers on one side and Islamists on the other. Amer's criticism of Islam was a mistake that the government seized upon.
I think the Kareem sentence is part of a very wise strategy by President Mubarak, who wants, of course, to send a signal to the other bloggers and to tell them to quiet down. But that's only part of it. He also wants to address the Islamists and tell them that he's on their side, and by that by sentencing these bloggers, this blogger, he shows that he can be tough against people who criticize Islam.
The Egyptian blogosphere has been less loud since the sentencing, but it is by no means silent. And as they were saying at the Free Kareem protest in the US, bloggers in Egypt may be aiming their message at their own people. It's being heard all over the world.
As an individual from the Arab world, working here in the US, I really look up to such brave men and women, whether bloggers or young students or young people in the Middle East. I think these are really the people who are going to change the situation in the Middle East.
Our Global Village Voices now, and their take on the Kareem Amer story.
Apart from the severity of the sentence, it's particularly serious because this is the first time that such a decision has been taken against a blogger in Egypt. And blogs have been particularly useful in recent years in terms of highlighting the regime's excesses. But this is not an isolated incident. The Egyptian government has a history of restricting freedom of speech and expression. In the same week as the blogger's sentence, the Egyptian government took off the air an Iraqi satellite TV station after it angered the US and Iraqi governments. And the editor of an independent Egyptian newspaper has appealed against a one-year jail sentence for insulting the president. This is due to notoriously loose libel laws in Egypt that make it very easy for journalists to be sued and imprisoned. This is something the president promised to address in 2004, and he has seemingly failed to do so.